Who are the top 5 best Nen users in Hunter x Hunter? Simple question, but very complicated answer. Mostly due to the vagueness of the word best and what being the best entails. But there is actually a canonical answer to this question. Now bear in mind that this is hearsay, but a certain Biscuit Krueger once claimed that another certain Isaac Netero had constructed his own top 5 best Nen users in the world list. Which does make Netero sound a bit like a YouTuber, but he actually did this. And not only that, but it's heavily implied that he considers these 5 people to be even more powerful than him. And I use the word powerful on purpose, because when talking about Nen, strength and power are only one of the many factors to consider. However, Netero's definition of the best Nen user is, unsurprisingly, heavily tainted by his own personal bias towards power. Netero's entire life was about seeking out the strong, and then punching, slapping, and generally thwacking them with golden statue arms. However, in chapter 202, Netero claims that Neferpito is likely stronger than him, to which Nov says, "Surely you jest," in a very upper-class old money kind of way. After which point Netero says that it's been at least half a century since he was considered to be the most powerful Nen master. Again, I want to linger on that word, powerful, because when it comes to the best Nen users, Netero's metric is power, which is why that's exactly what we're going to be using to determine Netero's top 5 list. I should also say that Netero is a notoriously unreliable source of information. In fact, in the same page, he states that Moral and Nov are likely evenly matched with him at this point, which we all know is absolutely not true. I guess it's probably worth noting that Netero can't just whip out his Meruem performance at any given time, and he needed to meditate intensely to reach that state. But still, he is very powerful and a very sneaky prune, and so we're going to need to sift through his modesty and or blatant lies. But assuming that his statement to Bisky was true, Netero genuinely considers there to be 5 Nen users in this world that are even more powerful than himself. And our first confirmed candidate is none other than Ging Freecss. In fact, that guy, he's how the whole discussion came about. Gon asked Bisky in chapter 138 whether or not she knew Ging, to which the answer was no, but she knew of Ging. Specifically that Isaac Netero once labeled him as one of the world's top 5 best Nen users. So that was an easy start. Usually in these videos I need to make extensive, semi-logical arguments to support my statements, but this is just outright factual. Netero labeled Ging as one of the top 5. Netero's metric for Nen use is power, and therefore Ging is potentially even more powerful than the Isaac Netero we knew, which if true is exceptionally impressive, mainly because Ging is only 34 years old, whereas the path of the Nen master tends to peak closer to the 50s and 60s. But in any case, our drink-sipping, suit-wearing, panda-owning Ging Freecss will assume his place in the top 5. A big part of this video was also determining who can't possibly be one of these candidates. And so I think we should briefly discuss the Chimera ants. They are obviously not going to be considered in this discussion simply because Netero's list was constructed prior to their existence. In a more modern setting, Meruem and perhaps all of the Royal Guard would slot comfortably into the top 5, but that's not what I want to know. What I want to know is who were the top 5 at the time of Greed Island, because I think that is infinitely more interesting. And given that we've started with the Zodiac, I think it's more than reasonable to continue with them. As a fierce rival of Mr. Ging, Pariston Hill is naturally going to slide himself into the conversation like a well-lubed rat. He's often considered to be exceptionally powerful because of one of the Zodiac requirements, that requirement being that each and every one of them need to be available to spar with Netero. That's why he made them, that's why he does everything to find strong people to fight. But if Pariston is truly powersome, then he hides it very, very well, such as in chapter 343, where Pariston asserts his position as second in command of the Dark Continent expedition team, to which Ging retorts, so it's not a hierarchy of strength then. In fact, Ging initially identifies Marion as the most powerful member of the expedition team, who is the robot doll girl thing. Pariston, as always, is difficult, because he often claims that he's weak, but he also often contradicts this by accusing people of grossly underestimating him. And with that, I can't say I'm confident in labeling him as one of the top 5, because it really could go either way. And I have to say, the rest of the Zodiacs don't do much better, which we know thanks to Hisoka's personal grading system. Hyon, Kanzai, and Ginto were rated by our battle clown, receiving a 77, 85, and 90 respectively, which all sounds nice and amazing until Illumi Zoldyck wanders in and registers as a 95. And I personally don't think that Illumi makes Netero's list. There are just way too many other candidates, in fact many of which are older Zoldycks. However, I do believe that there is one more Zodiac who could possibly have attained one of these spots. His name is Botabai Gigante, and he was not subject to Hisoka's rating system. However, he is subject to a disputed translation. When announcing one of the election rounds, Botabai was labeled as advisor to the Zodiacs and close to the previous chairman. That's the official translation, so it makes Netero and Botabai sound like old chum friends. However, other translators have actually disputed this and claimed that it more accurately says something like, both in name and reality, this man is the closest to the chairman, which annoyingly can also be interpreted in many different ways. It could be implying that there's some sort of equivalent in power. It could also be referencing their functional abilities as a chairman, administration, leadership, the stuff. But again, it could just be implying that they're old friends. What tips me over the edge, though, is that Botabai is an undisputedly combat-focused Nen user. He is a triple-star terrorist hunter, with roles specifically relating to military, security, and justice. Of all of the Zodiacs, he's the one who exudes the most power. He's also the oldest, being 50, which is prime Nen age, having lived long enough to master the art form, but not having lived quite long enough to go into elderly decline as Netero had. I think it's perfectly reasonable to incorporate Botabai into the top 5, because he's about as powerful as you can get within the association unless you're Netero or allegedly Ging. But it's not all about the Hunter Association. In fact, many of our most powerful Nen users exist completely separate to the association, with one of the next natural assumptions being to examine the Phantom Troupe, specifically Krollo. One of the weird things about Hunter x Hunter is that the Phantom Troupe and the Hunter Association have never really collided. Yeah, they've done that. They've not collided. The closest we've come is both groups now being aboard the Black Whale 1, but as a result, we've never gotten any insight into what higher level association members think of the troupe. And I do think that Krollo could be considered one of the best Nen users by my own personal criteria, but I just don't know if he has the raw power that Netero would have used as a metric. And if he did, we don't know if Netero would have been familiar enough with Krollo to make that judgment. If we were to use Hisoka's scale, Krollo likely sits a couple of points higher than Illumi, maybe a 96 or a 97, which is why Hisoka chooses to pursue him over anyone else. But when it comes to Netero, I just can't see Krollo being on his mind. Someone he is very familiar with, however, is Netero's own son, Beyond Netero. And I mean, it's all in the name, really. Togashi is often very blunt with this sort of information. Beyond is almost certainly more powerful than the Isaac Netero we knew, because Beyond is like Isaac Netero in his prime. Beyond is somewhere in his 60s or 70s, as opposed to at least the 112 years old that Isaac was. So Beyond is still comparatively youthful. And in fact, he's around half a century younger than Isaac at least, which is the time period where Isaac Netero identified himself as being the most powerful Nen user. Although even 50 years ago, Beyond was powerful enough to survive a voyage to the Dark Continent, and at this point, he is practically guaranteed to be one of the top 5. He's not the only one to survive a Dark Continent voyage, though. In fact, Netero's companions on one of his journeys are still alive and well, one Linné hors d'oeuvre and Zig Zoldyck, who is very much implied to be Maha Zoldyck. I'm not going to go into why and how because it's a long story. I have a whole separate video about it, but trust me, it's very convincing. But at one stage, I would not be surprised if this trio were considered part of the top 5 or even the top 3 themselves. However, just as with Isaac Netero, Linné and Zig have since endured the ravages of age. If Netero peaked 50 years ago, then so did they. No doubt still very powerful, but unlikely to be sitting quite at the top. And I would argue that the most powerful current Zoldyck is Zeno, sitting at the, again, comparatively youthful age of 69, which sounds really old until you realize that Maha/Zig is at least 50 years older than that. But Zeno is, objectively, one of the most powerful Nen masters we've seen, provided we discount the Chimera Ants and the Dark Continent creatures. Now, the argument against Zeno is usually the Krollo fight. The fact that he had a lot of difficulty facing that there Krollo even 2-on-1 with Silver. And Zeno did also state that the fight would be entirely different if Krollo were actually trying to kill him, but I do think that this is very inconsistent with Zeno's portrayal in future arcs. Fun fact now, Zeno is the only character in Hunter x Hunter to realize that he's actually a character and start speaking directly to the readers, during which he described his relationship with Isaac Netero as being yin and yang, but also making sure to state, don't be stupid, we're not equals. He's always gotten the best of me. But the very fact that Zeno has fought Netero on multiple occasions and experienced the 100 type Guanyin Bodhisattva speaks volumes about his own personal power. Zeno is so much more than what we saw in that fight against Krollo. And I think that this is a Togashi inconsistency issue. And of every character we currently know, I think that Zeno is one of the most likely to be one of Netero's top 5 best Nen users. However, I would add that Netero is probably being very modest and very sneaky, very deceptive by not including himself on that list. But provided that we take his word at face value, we run into an interesting situation to find our final candidate. At this point, I would like to introduce you to the concept of the Togashi Power Chart, a fan-compiled dataset of information gathered from the official Hunter x Hunter databook. It's deceptively named because it's not known if Togashi produced this information himself. He may very well have, because he's done similar things in the past. He does have internal notes regarding Nen powers and use and where people are graded with their A's, their B's, their C's, and the numbers. But this data analyzes Nen users based on 6 criteria, each being scored out of 5 for a potential maximum of 30 points, which Netero does achieve. I should note that characters like Meruem and Gyro do not appear in this set. Meruem because his abilities were so far off the scale that they simply can't be quantified, and Gyro because his abilities were left tantalizingly mysterious. But if we look at the rest, under Netero are the Royal Guard, who we're discounting, but the next highest ranked Nen user is is very surprisingly Biscuit, who scored a whopping 26 points. According to this, Biscuit is a better Nen user than Crollo, who scored 25. Which, sure, fine, I can absolutely believe that. Biscuit is 59 years old, again smack bang in that peak Nen mastery zone, and she is incredibly powerful, as well as a close associate of Netero. So I could definitely see her being in the top 5 at the time of Greed Island. So let's say that Togashi did make these charts, which I tend to believe he probably did. However, even then, it's a painfully selective dataset because so many characters were left out for whatever reason. For example, other than Killua, no other Zoldycks are ranked, which is a bit weird because we've known them since practically the beginning of the series, and Illumi in particular is a staple of Hunter x Hunter. So all of them could be well and truly above Biscuit. But according to the evidence we have, I have no choice but to seriously, and I mean seriously, consider Biscuit Krueger for our 5th slot. And really, there's only one other option I can think of, and it's a bit of a long shot. But there is at least one lurking legend in the Hunter x Hunter world who may be known to Netero, and that is Ging Freecss, a man who would be over 300 years young if he was still alive at this point, but also a man who would likely be the most powerful Nen-using human to have ever existed, apart from Jesus. Jesus is canonically a Nen user. And if you want to know more about that, you can check out some of my iceberg videos. There's some really fun information in there. But Netero has been to the Dark Continent twice, so it's not entirely inconceivable to think that he may have met Don. However, given the colossal size of the continent, the idea of them simply running into one another is a little bit far-fetched. But excluding the potential of Don, these are my proposed top 5 best Nen users according to both the criteria of Isaac Netero and the available evidence we have. Let me know what your top 5 are in the comments below. Or not, go watch another video. I don't care what you do with your day.